Patch 6.2 is introducing not just Durin, but also direct kit buffs to several old Mondstadt characters, and they all directly synergize with Durin very well. Last video, we went over the old characters being buffed into strong DPS units, those being Venti, Klee, and Razor. So in today's video, we'll be going over the supports, so that's Fischl, Sucrose, Mona, and Albedo. Let's get started. Alright, so we've known about Durin and these kit buffs for a few days now, so most of you probably already know what they do, but to give a quick summary, Durin, Albedo, Klee, Venti, Mona, Sucrose, Fischl, and Razor are all now considered magic characters, and having two magic characters on the team will grant them all powerful new effects. Durin's Res Shred goes up from 20 to 35%, the self-vape/melt damage bonus buff from his Black Dragon form goes from 40 to 70%. Albedo now makes clones of his flowers, so if the flower breaks, he basically just gets a new one, making contract issues no longer a problem for him. He now also gets an extra 240 defense multiplier on his skill hits, which basically doubles the damage, since compared to before, the base multiplier was 240, so that's quite literally double the multiplier. Additionally, he'll provide a team-wide damage bonus buff, scaling off his defense up to 42% for magic characters, and 12% for everyone else. His C1, which you can get for free, now also gives him 50% defense. These buffs combined turn Albedo into one of the highest damaging sub-DPS units in the game right now, while also buffing Elemental Mastery and damage bonus for the team, plus even being able to give some interruption resistance via crystallized shields, and he can even use support sets like Tenacity or Archaic Petra if needed. Mona's buffs are focused on making her a better Vaporize support, as her auto attacks can now extend the duration of her Omen by up to 8 seconds, while also giving her stacks that are consumed when a party member triggers the Vaporize, increasing the reaction damage bonus of that hit by up to 30%. But the stacks are consumed after one hit, so if you're not using Mona as an on-field driver for an off-field pyro DPS like Durin, you won't be seeing much of this. But Mona's C1 will now be giving 24 vape damage percent instead of 15, and her C2 now gives 80 elemental mastery to the team after she performs a charged attack, which will automatically happen after performing a normal attack without extra input needed. So Mona is clearly intended to be a dedicated Vaporize support now, but keep in mind her off-field Hydro only lasts 5 seconds, so she doesn't actually work as an off-field Hydro applier for Pyro DPS, thus the amount of teams these buffs are good for is quite few. And for Fischl, she'll now give 22.5% attack to herself and your on-fielder when any party member triggers Overload, or 90 Elemental Mastery if it was Electro or Lunar charged instead. These buffs are doubled to 45% and 180 respectively if Fischl is C6. The Overload buff is great for making Fischl a competent alternative to Eon-san and Sara, in some cases even better than them, while the Elemental Mastery buff will pretty much just be for using her as an Nefer alternative to Flins if you don't have C6 Sara, though note that it requires playing without Sustain since you need Sucrose as the second magic character. And speaking of Sucrose, she now provides a small damage bonus buff of about 6% when casting her skill, and another 7% on top from her burst, so 13%. Pretty nice, but nothing that's really going to make any real changes to Sucrose or her teams, especially since her Lunar teams do not care about damage bonus. But with those buffs explained, let's take a look at the teams. One unique team that makes full and proper use out of Mona's new buffs is Durin, Mona, Albedo, and Shilonen. This team essentially uses Durin as an off-field hypercarry in his Black Dragon form, getting great buffs from everyone on the team, while Mona drives on the field to supply the Hydro needed for him to Vaporize, her driving also extending that Omen to 13 seconds, plus giving those new Vaporize damage bonus stacks. Albedo is benefiting greatly from all the buffs on this team. The team in particular has 91% Georesonance shred between Durin, Shilonen, and Georesonance, so having that plus all the other buffs has him doing around 1 million damage per rotation of his own, which is kinda insane. So this team is legitimately strong. It actually has higher DPS than every other Pyro DPS in the game, with the exception of Mavrika. Aside from this, the only other team I found Mona made any sense in was with Mualani. Those Vaporized damage bonus stacks that Mona provides being consumed by just one hit isn't so bad for Mualani, since it's going to be on a huge Shark Bite. Plus, Mona being able to extend her Omen will easily get 2 Shark Bites buffed by it. Even though Durin does not shred Hydro Resonance, this still came out to be more DPS than Mualani's current team. However, despite Mona being specialized for Vaporize, I actually found that Albedo counts higher than her here. The total amount of buffing to Mualani is not that much less, while he also does great personal damage, so you're gonna notice throughout this video that Durin, Albedo, Shilonen is a very strong team card. But Durin and Albedo are great together even without Shilonen involved. For example, Navia's new highest DPS team is them plus Bennett. This doesn't use Mavrika, so she'll be free for another team, which is really nice. Ito can also use the brothers with either Chiori or C6 Goro as the last slot. This is a bit of an upgrade over his team with Inefa and Farina, but it has no healer or shielder. Noelle is her own healer and shielder though, so she can do the same team and it'll be a decent upgrade over her current team options. Another team I tried is Albedo and Durin together with Nubalette, Shalonen as the 4th slot. So this team is meant to have Nubalette doing good damage on field while applying Hydro for Durin to vaporize, and Albedo does his thing as well. Funny enough, Albedo calced higher than Farina in the same team here, though if you don't have Nubalette's weapon, he might have energy issues if you try to play this team. This isn't an upgrade over Nubalette's current best team though, but it could still be good to have in your arsenal as a Nubalette main. There's also Linny with Bennett as the 4th slot. It's double Pyro, so Linny isn't getting his full buff, but Georesonance plus Albedo's buff makes up for that. Overload actually counts higher for Linny, with Durin, Chevres, and Fischl using her new Overload buff. The Mono Pyro team may be better in practice though, as the Crystallized Shard can help Linny safely perform his charge shots. But speaking of Overload, let's take a look at those teams. There's quite a lot. Raiden Overload was in great need of an off-field pyro that did both good damage and buffing at the same time. That's exactly what Durin is, so we're using him plus Fischl, and this is a lot stronger than her current Overload teams, while even being strong as her new Hyperbloom teams, and thus it will naturally be even stronger than Hyperbloom if you have Raiden's constellations and or weapon. I did Calcs Sara in place of Fischl here, but because the rotation becomes longer with her, it was slightly less DPS than using Fischl. Chlorand Overload is also getting an upscale. Janssen is a bit higher DPS than Fischl, but Chlorand players are more likely to have a C6 Fischl, so her being a close alternative is pretty great. Same applies to Razor as shown in the last video. C6 Janssen is a bit better than Fischl, as Razor does a ton of dash cancels, which lets him stay at Janssen's max attack buff for almost his entire field time, but it's still pretty strong with Fischl, so she's a great alternative. One Overload team that did do better with Fischl is Kaching, and this did a lot better than I expected. What happens here is you do a 25-second rotation, so you use Oz twice, once with Fischl's skill, once with her burst for around 24 seconds of Oz uptime. That allows her to do super high damage in this longer rotation. This is looking to be a pretty considerable upgrade over her current best team, which is Lunar Charged. Out of curiosity, I also tried this Overload team car for Sino, but it's a lot worse than his new Quick Bloom team, so just stick with that if you have it. Then there's the Queen of Electro Overload DPS, Varessa. You'll still want to use Eonsan for her because the synergy is just way too good, but even without a second magic character on the team, Durin is just about the exact same DPS as Mavrika for the off-field Pyro slot here, and freeing up Mavrika is always great. And as we saw with Linny, Pyro DPS can use the Overload core extremely well. It's a fairly decent upgrade over double Cryo Melt for Yoimiya. Just keep in mind there won't be a shield, but having a shield on Yoimiya is less important outside of Vape and Melt since you lose way less by dodging. Olakino can use the core, and it's definitely strong, but her Melt and Overvape teams calc higher. Do note that for Olakino teams without a shield, I assume she has to use her burst to heal, so that's making the rotation longer and preventing her Bond of Life from building up higher each rotation. If you could play the Overload team without needing her burst, it will be stronger. But then Klee, we talked about her in the last video, but as we know, she applies extremely fast Pyro, so trying to use her in Vape or Melt just doesn't work that well, making Overload a great fit. But the Albedo Shalonen Durin double Geocar calcs a bit higher than Overload, while Crystallize will be very helpful for Klee until low poise. And that's just about all of the teams involving Fischl, Mona, Albedo, and Sucrose. Well, Sucrose wasn't in any of these teams, but you get the point. So now, let's quickly go over teams where Durin is by himself as the only magic character, and see if he's still any good. First, we have Kanich. I tried Durin in place of Eonsan. It's not quite as strong, but also not too far behind, so Durin will be a great option if you don't have a C6 Eonsan. I know some people might be wondering about using Durin in place of Emily, but I would not recommend that, since you have an extremely hard time ever getting the scroll buff on Denture without an off-field applier. Another thing I figured some might be curious about is using Durin as the off-field Pyro applier for Cryo DPS to melt like Risley or Ganyu, but there's a few problems. One, Durin does not decrease Cryo resistance, so he's not providing any buffs here, and two, he only applies Pyro once every 2.5 seconds, which is too slow for Melt on its own, meaning you'll need to go with Burner Melt. But as you can see from the math, Risley does more damage in an Escoffier Freeze team despite not having an amp reaction, while still having high sub DPS damage in that team, so if you have Escoffier, there's really just not much reason to use Melt over Freeze for Cryo DPS anymore. And then Wanderer, many players, myself included, really wanted Durin to be the big new support Wanderer needs, but unfortunately, he's just a side grade to Farina. But since this is double Pyro, the energy is going to be way more convenient in Stygian Onslaught than using Farina, so it will likely feel like a good degree better in practice. Also, as mentioned in the last video, you can actually use a second magic character with Wanderer. That would be by using Venti in place of Farazan. Venti will provide a 50 damage bonus buff to Wanderer while also buffing his own burst damage by 35% multiplicatively. So he's buffing by less than Farazan, but doing good damage of his own, and the rotation is shorter since you're not bound to Farazan's cooldown, so the DPS is overall the same. That requires Venti's burst to actually be hitting the enemy though, so that can be unreliable since sometimes his burst just doesn't hit, so just keep that in mind. Something surprising though was, I found Durin Calcs a bit better than Farina for Hypercarry Xiao with Farazan and Xian Yun. The rotation should be about a second shorter, with Xiao getting full uptime on all the buffs, whereas in the FFXX team, your last few plunges miss out on buffs. It's an extremely small DPS gain over FFXX, so it's just a side grade, but it's still pretty neat that it's usable at all. For Xiao, I also tried to see if he could do the same thing as Wanderer and use Venti as a Farazan alternative, but it was bad, don't do this. With Wanderer, Venti can at least snapshot Bennett's buff, but there's nothing like that on Xiao's team. Plus, unlike Farazan, Venti is not a good anemo battery, so Xiao suddenly needs over 170 ER, whereas Wanderer could just burst every other rotation. So yeah, just don't bother trying this with Xiao. And the absolute last thing I looked into is Chaska. The issue with trying to use Durin with Chaska is he doesn't fit into Vape because you'd have to replace Eon-Sun, and she does too much to be replaced there, especially considering you'd be going from 3 elements to 2. Then Melt, he has to replace Mavrika, but that huge front-loaded Melt bust from Mavrika is just way too strong to not have. Plus, Durin is not providing Res Shred from Melts. He will get Pyro Shred from Chaska Swirls, but the Cryo Bullets aren't getting it, and those are the ones melting, so that kinda sucks. It's still a good team with Durin on it, don't get me wrong, it's just definitely not at all worth it over Mavrika. One final thing I wanted to look into but gave up on is using Durin instead of Zhongling for Childe International. The idea was Childe, Bennett, Durin, Sucrose, but trying out a brand new Childe rotation without having the units to test it in-game was a nightmare. Plus, Durin's talent multipliers aren't actually much higher than Zhongling's, while he applies far less Pyro, so we just can't get that insane amount of Vapes that Zhongling does with Childe, defeating the entire purpose. Perhaps if Durin gets buffed to have no ICD, this could be worth exploring, but right now it just doesn't seem worth the headache. But yeah, that covers everything. To give a quick recap, here's a quick unordered tier list of which units I think Durin is and isn't good for, but I'm curious to know your thoughts, let me know in the comments. Also feel free to join my Discord, link in the description. Thanks, and goodbye.